So, unlike most dry flies with, you know, a parachute or a hackle, like a thorax hackle, I'm not going to tie the post in first. Normally you tie your post in and your tail so you can get the proportions correct. But because I'm going to tie this mono in a loop, and it's going to be facing backwards, that's going to be in my way the whole time. So the way I'm going to start this is I'm going to start my thread where I want my hackle to start. And for me, on this size, it's going to be right about here, roughly 2 eye lengths back. So if you measure the eye of this hook and go back 1 and 2, that's where I'm going to start my thread. And that's where the body is going to end and where we're going to start putting the hackle on. So I'm going to start my thread.
By the way, there'll be plenty of time to do a couple or 3 of these tonight. I would suggest you watch him do this from start to finish. It doesn't take that long, but it'll help you a lot in terms of understanding that dexterity that you need to do it.
So I'm going to start this, and then I'm going to wind my thread down the hook, down the bend. Oop, not catch the point. About halfway down the bend there. And that's where I'm going to start my dubbing. And we've got 2 colors here, and when they're on the table they're kind of similar in color. The smaller clump should be Adam's gray, which is going to be our thorax, and then our body is just going to be this this tan color. So I'm going to take this tan, and one thing you'll find out if you use Spectra Blend and like Superfine dubbings is when you put it on your thread, it does not want to come off. So less is more, because if you put too much on, you really can't do anything about it except for use it. So I'm going to take very small little wisps, and that's actually a lot, but I know I kind of need a decent amount. So I'm going to start this on my thread, and this stuff dubs down very thin, which is nice. You can get really precise body tapers, but I'm going to start with that much, and then if I need more, I'm going to add more. And we're just going to start wrapping that dubbing on. We do want a bit of a taper, and you can do that by trying to taper the dubbing, or my preferred method, it's a little more time consuming, but I feel like I have better control over it, is I'm just gonna add a little bit more here, and when I get to where I started my thread, I'm going to work back down the shank. So at this point it's pretty fast and easy, but see, I get to where I start my thread. I'm going to retwist this here. And then I'm going to start going back down. And that's going to make this top section thicker. I'm going to add a little bit more here. Slide that up. Again, start this taper going down, and when you go back down, you're going to go about 2/3 of the way to the end here, and then when you start wrapping back up, I learned this with doing thread bodies. If you're trying to keep it smooth, don't just wrap right back over. You want to do an open wrap and start that taper a little bit further up so it's a little more gradual. And I need just a pinch more to get this taper the way I want it. Slide that up. Continue this taper. I've got that thin spot here. I'm going to do a couple wraps here just to get rid of that thin spot. And again, I've added dubbing probably, what, 6 times now? it's a whole lot easier to get a better, cleaner body by doing small additions of dubbing than trying to add it all in one little section. You're going to end up with a bulkier body. It's not going to look as good, and it's not going to last as long. It's going to fray out. So I've got my body where I want it, and now because mono is fairly slippery and the thread I'm using is very slippery, I would advise to wrap this here with a couple open wraps, and that's just going to give texture for this mono to grip onto. And it's a good thing to get used to doing, especially if you're going to do articulated flies where you tie two hooks together, which we'll be doing on the last class. Having a rough surface to tie in wire or mono is going to allow it to stick better. It's going to hold better. So this loop, it's all personal preference. I've found about, I don't know, 2 inches is good, because then I can raise this up and still have enough room to mess with my hackles. If you make it, really big, you're not going to be able to keep your hackle down low. So I tend to do about 2 inches. Roughly, I just kind of eyeball it. I'm going to lay it here, kind of at an angle. I don't know if you can see that. It's at an angle. It's going to allow me to capture this with a loose wrap, and then you can move it to the top of the hook, because we want our hackle to go over the top. We don't want it on the side or anything like that. I found if you try to just tie it in on top, one piece of that mono is going to want to slip over, and you're only going to capture one. So once you capture it, wrap forward with some good pressure, and then I always like to grab these tag ends and fold them back. There's nothing like being halfway through wrapping your hackle and having the loop pull out, and then you have to start all over. So a little reassurance of folding it over makes that mono not go anywhere. I'm going to take these tag ends and snip those off. And we're going to take our hackle, and I think I got everybody pretty close to the right size we need. And you'll notice all these fibers go in one direction. And we're going to take the base where they all kind of point down to, and if you gently preen these fibers out, just at the very base, we're going to take this and I'm going to snip these a little closer than that, like so. And it leaves, you can't really see it. You can see it like that. No. A little bit. Well, there's little bits hanging off there, and that's going to allow it to stick better. You can just peel all these fibers off, but it's just a bare stem at that point, and it doesn't want to, it tends to pull out easy. I'm going to tie this in. And get a couple good wraps on that. I'm going to wrap it all the way to the eye, and then all the way back. And at this point, this is where the dexterity comes in, because we're going to have to use both hands and fingers that you're probably not used to using in conjunction while holding and turning. So I take my left index finger, put it in the loop and hold tension. I'm then going to take my left middle finger and thumb and start wrapping this around this mono. And the key here, so with a parachute you wrap down. With this technique we're going to wrap up and then down. So we're going to pack a lot of hackle on here. It's going to float really well. And the key is to keep in mind how long of a thorax you have. It doesn't really matter counting your turns. I found with this size, it's about 10 turns up, But right here I'm gonna check. I'm gonna fold this forward, and that's right to the eye. So that's right where I want it. And now that I've switched hands, it's gonna get tricky here. So now that I've got the length I need, I'm going to start wrapping back down and through all this other hackle. Nice thing about this technique also is when you're doing a parachute, you have to be concerned about which way the feather's facing, whether the concave is down or up. Because we're going through all this hackle multiple times, it doesn't really matter. Your hackle can be ugly like this. If this was a parachute, I'd cut it off and I'd try it again, because this looks not very good. But because of the next step, it really doesn't matter. And when I get down to the bottom, I like to do 1, 2 extra turns.
I was going to ask you, Tyler, do you try to do 10 consistently back down, same
Yep.
numbers?
Well,
roughly?
Roughly,
Okay.
yep. But you can see how thick that is. That's going to float really nice. Now at this point, I can hold my hackle and I can take my finger out of that, because I need to come right here and preen all these fibers out of the way and pinch it so that I can tie this hackle off. That's probably the trickiest part, is holding all this stuff out of the way and tying it all off. Once you get a good grasp on it, you can come in, try to get all those fibers, and snip your hackle. And again, preen everything out of the way, wrap your thread all the way back to where that base is. And then we're going to do dubbing part 2, which is the thorax. We're going to use the Adams gray just for a different color. And again, wispy amounts of dubbing. Makes it a whole lot easier. You can get the correct, diameters. It's not overrun with dubbing. And you'll notice, I don't know if you guys could see this before, but there's a gap of where my dubbing starts and here. If I take my finger, I can just slide this up to the fly, and then I'm not adding thread wraps. When you get into dry flies and small flies, you really have to pay attention to thread size, because you can add unnecessary bulk really easily by adding too many wraps. So I'm going to preen all these fibers out of the way and start doing a thorax here. And again, just like the body, I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. I'm going to look at it. I need a little bit more dubbing, because we want it just a little bit thicker than where our body ended. Not much, but just a little bit. And a little bit thicker here. Get down to the eye, do a couple wraps just to give yourself a base. And now the other tricky part is you have to, again, I like to use my pinky here. I'll put my right pinky in the loop. I'm going to preen all these fibers back and out of the way. I'm going to pull this forward while holding all the fibers, and I'm going to pinch it right on top. I'm going to capture it with 1, 2, 3 fairly loose wraps, and you can see that hackle is not all the way up to the eye. I'm then going to pull on this loop, and I'm going to tighten it down, and it's going to bring that hackle up. Again, pull these fibers out of the way, really tie it down, and for added security, if you want, you can fold this mono back again. This gets kind of hard to tie in. And do a couple more wraps, and very carefully come in and snip that mono. And from right here, I'm going to whip finish or half hitch. Some whip finish tools have a half hitch tool. And I found with down eye dry fly hooks, it's usually a good idea to put a half hitch in before you try to whip finish, because this eye is pointed down, this thread wants to fall off constantly. So at this point, it's not going anywhere, and I can do a 1 or 2 whip finishes here, and then hit it with some thread cement. But overall, it's a pretty quick and easy fly once you get used to using what I call, or what a lot of people call, your material hand, which would be your non-bobbin hand. But that's, oh, I got some strays here.
Yeah, you're trimming the bottom.
Yep, I don't want any hairs down there or fibers. So that's better. And those were from when I tied that stem in after I wrapped it. Sometimes you trap them, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's perfect, sometimes it's not. But that's why we have scissors. But yeah, again, pretty easy. It floats like a cork, and you can do it in almost any size or color you could ever want.